Troy. Between the Greek mainland and Crete, 220 islands dot the Aegean, forming a circle around Delos, and therefore called the Cyclades. Most are rugged and barren, precarious mountain survivals of a land half drowned in the sea, but some were rich enough in metal or marble to be already busy and civilized, as the world goes, long before Greek history comes into our view. In 1896, the British School of Athens dug into the soil of Milos at Philokopi and found tools, weapons, and pottery remarkably akin, age by age, to the Minoan. And a like research in other islands has built up a prehistoric picture of the Cyclades conforming in time and character, though never comparable in artistic excellence, with the bioscope of Crete. The Cyclades were cramped for land, totaling less than 1,000 square miles among them, and proved, like classic Greece, incapable of uniting under one political power. By the 17th century BC, the little isles had passed in government and art, even here and there in language and writing, under Cretan domination. Then, in the final period, 1400 to 1200, the imports from Crete fell away, and the islands increasingly took their pottery and their styles from Mycenae. Moving eastward into the Sporades, scattered islands, we find in Rhodes another prehistoric culture of the simpler Aegean type. In Cyprus, the rich deposits of copper that gave the island its name brought it a measure of wealth throughout the Bronze Age, 3400 to 1200. But its wares, sedulously collected by General di Cesnola, and now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, remained crude and undistinguished before the coming of Cretan influence. Its population, predominantly Asiatic, used a syllabic script akin to the Minoan, and worshipped a goddess apparently descended from the Semitic Ishtar, and destined to become the Aphrodite of the Greeks. After 1600, the metal industry of the island developed rapidly. The mines, owned by the royal government, exported copper to Egypt, Crete, and Greece. The foundry at Enkomoi made famous daggers, and the potters sold their globular bowls from Egypt to Troy. The forests were cut into timber, and cypress from Cyprus began to compete with the cedars of Lebanon. In the 13th century, Mycenaean colonists founded the colonies that were to become the Greek cities of Paphos, sacred to Aphrodite, and Citium, birthplace of the Stoic Zeno, in Cyprian Salamis, where Solon paused in his wanderings to replace chaos with law. From Cyprus, Mycenaean trade and influence crossed to Syria and Caria, and thence, as well as by other, quote, rowing stones, they moved up the coasts and islands of Asia until they reached Troy. There, on a hill separated by 3 miles from the sea, Schliemann and Dörpfeld found 9 cities, superimposed each upon its predecessor, as if Troy had had 9 lives. In the lowest strata were the remains of a Neolithic village coming down to 3000 BC. Here were walls of rough stones mortared with mud, clay whorls, bits of worked ivory, tools of obsidian, and pieces of hand-polished black pottery. Above this lay the ruins of the second city, which Schliemann believed to have been Homer's Troy. Its enclosing walls, like those of Tiryns and Mycenae, were of Cyclopean stones. At intervals there were fortresses, and at the corners great double gates, of which 2 are well preserved. Some houses survive to a height of 4 feet, their walls built of brick and wood upon a stone foundation. The red painted pottery, wheel-turned but crude, indicates a lifespan for the city from approximately 2400 to 1900. Bronze has replaced stone for tools and weapons, and jewelry abounds. But the statuettes are unprepossessingly primitive. The second city was apparently destroyed by fire. Signs of conflagration are numerous, and persuaded Schliemann that this was the work of Agamemnon's Greeks. Above the quote, burnt city, are the relics of 3 successive hamlets, small and poor, and negligible in archaeologic content. About 1600, another city rose on the historic hill. Through the passionate haste of his work, Schliemann mixed the objects of the stratum with those of the second, and dismissed the 6th city as an unimportant, quote, Lydian settlement. But Dörpfeld, continuing the excavations after Schliemann's death, and for a time with Schliemann's money, revealed a town considerably larger than the second, ornate with substantial buildings in dressed stone, and enclosed by a 30-foot wall of whose gates 3 remain. In the ruins were monochrome vases of finer workmanship than before, vessels like the, quote, mignon ware of Orchomenos, and potsherds so like those found at Mycenae that Dörpfeld considered them to be importations from that city, and therefore contemporary with the Shaftgrave dynasty, 1400 to 1200. On these and other shifting grounds, current opinion identifies the 6th city with Homer's Troy, and assigns to it the, quote, treasury of Priam that Schliemann thought he had found in the 2nd city. 6 bracelets, 2 goblets, 2 diadems, a fillet, 60 earrings, and 8,700 other pieces, all in gold. The 6th city, too, we are assured, perished by fire, shortly after 1200. Greek historians traditionally assigned the siege of Troy to 1194 to 1184 BC. Who were the Trojans? An ancient papyrus mentions certain Dardanui as among the allies of the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, 1287. It is likely that these were the ancestors of the Dardanoi, who, in Homer's terminology, are one with the Trojans. Probably these Dardanoi were of Balkan origin, crossed the Hellespont in the 16th century with the kindred Phrygians, and settled in the lower valley of the Scamander. Herodotus, however, identified the Trojans with the Teucrians, and the Teucrians, according to Strabo, were Cretans who settled in the Troad, perhaps after the fall of Knossos. The name Troy was traced by Greek tradition to the eponymous hero Tros, father of Aeolus, father of Laomedon, father of Priam. Hence the variant names of the city: Troas, Ilios, Ilion, Ilium. An eponymous hero, or eponym, is a probably legendary person to whom a social or political group attributes its origin and name. The Dardani, for example, believed or pretended that they were descended from Dardanus, son of Zeus. So the Dorians traced themselves to Doris, the Ionians to Ion. Both Crete and the Troad had a sacred Mount Ida. the many-fountained Ida of Homer and Tennyson. Presumably, the region was subject at various times to political and ethnic influences from the Hittite hinterland. All in all, the excavations indicate a civilization partly Minoan, partly Mycenaean, partly Asiatic, partly Danubian. Homer represents the Trojans as speaking the same language and worshipping the same gods as the Greeks. But later Hellenic imagination preferred to think of Troy as an Asiatic city, and of the famous siege as the first known episode in an endless conflict between Semite and Aryan, East and West. More significant than the racial complexion of its people was the strategic position of Troy near the entrance to the Hellespont in the rich lands about the Black Sea. Throughout history, that narrow passage has been the battleground of empires. The siege of Troy was the Gallipoli adventure of 1194 BC. The plain was moderately fertile, and precious metals lay in the soil to the east, but this alone would hardly account for the wealth of Troy and the tenacious attack of the Greeks. The city was admirably placed to levy tolls upon vessels wishing to pass through the Hellespont, while it was too far inland to be conveniently assailed from the sea. Perhaps it was this, and not Helen's face, that launched 1,000 ships upon Ilium. On a likelier theory, the southward current and winds in the strait persuaded merchants to unload their cargoes at Troy and ship them overland into the interior. From the charges exacted for this service, Troy may have derived its wealth and power. In any case, the city's trade grew rapidly, as may be judged from the varied provenance of its remains. From the lower Aegean came copper, olive oil, wine, and pottery. From the Danube and Thrace came pottery, amber, horses, and swords. From distant China came so great a rarity as jade. In return, Troy brought from the interior and exported timber, silver, gold, and wild asses. Seated proudly behind their walls, the horse-taming Trojans dominated the Troad and taxed its trade on land and sea. The picture that we derive from the Iliad of Priam and his household is one of biblical grandeur and patriarchal benevolence. The king is polygamous, not as a diversion, but as a royal responsibility to continue his high breed abundantly. His sons are monogamous, and as well behaved as the fictitious Victorians, excepting, of course, the gay Paris, who is as innocent of morals as Alcibiades. Hector, Helenus, and Troilus are more likable than the vacillating Agamemnon, the treacherous Odysseus, and the petulant Achilles. Andromache and Polyxena are as charming as Helen in Iphigenia, and Hecuba is a shade better than Clytemnestra. All in all, the Trojans, as pictured by their enemies, seem to us less deceitful, more devoted, better gentlemen than the Greeks who conquered them. The conquerors themselves felt this in later days. Homer had many a kind word to say for the Trojans, and Sappho and Euripides left no doubt as to where their sympathies and admiration lay. It was a pity that these noble Dardanoi stood in the way of an expanding Greece, which, despite its multitude of faults, would, in the end, bring to this and every other region of the Mediterranean a higher civilization than they had ever known.